Alright, welcome back to Dream It Do It Travels. I'm Ryan, and today I am out here by myself. Erin didn't come along. She's not into bourbon, but we're here today for Jim Beam. I'm gonna try and do a tour and see what we can do. There's a restaurant here, maybe grab a bite to eat, check out the gift shop, and why don't you come along? This is just one of many stops along the Bourbon Trail in Kentucky. Jim Beam just happens to be one of the most popular distilleries. This is the tasting bar, but I think we're gonna go grab some food before we start putting some alcohol in our system. This is the kitchen table. It's known as their sit-down restaurant here on property. I believe they do have some outdoor seating as well. But never had it. Gonna go give it a try. So they don't have a very extensive menu, but I will say that what they do have is very high quality. The prices are a little up there, but I will say the atmosphere and the hospitality and service is very, very good. And we had a nice view. So for my cocktail, I got a Hotham ember, and this is an old fashioned. I'm here with my father. I'm not drinking both of these. I would very much recommend this burger. It was delicious. The fries were very good as well. Very, very high quality. Now it's time to look into taking the tour. All right, so I signed up for the Beam Made Bourbon Distillery Tour and Tasting. They give you this little glass. It's a tasting glass. And this is my ticket here. And I'm going to meet up with the tour guide. And it's about a 75-minute tour, $30. And they give you basically Bourbon 101, everything that you need to know about how they make it and distill it. So, tastings along the way should be pretty good. I'll keep you posted. You get to keep the tasting cup as a souvenir.
All right, get those glasses out. Let me give you a pour. I ask you not to drink this until I tell you to. I'm going to teach you how to get 3 layers of flavor out of one taste of bourbon. Something maybe you've never done before, and something maybe you never want to do again, but we'll give it a try this one time. This is Jim Beam White Label, #1 selling bourbon in the world. It's 80 proof and it's 4 years old. When I drink bourbon, the first thing I like to do is look at the bourbon, the color. Most people don't realize this, but you can tell a lot about bourbon by its color. The older the bourbon, the darker the bourbon. The higher proof the bourbon, the darker the bourbon. So this is a 4-year-old bourbon that's a medium age, and it's 80 proof, that's low proof. So this is going to be a medium to light amber color. As we go on the tour, the next drink that you get, each drink hereafter will be progressively older and higher proof, and you'll notice that the bourbon gets darker and darker as we go. The next thing I like to do is to simply nose the bourbon. What we call nose means smell it. Part your lips slightly past the bourbon underneath your nose. Inhale, you're going to pick up some scents, and your brain will convert those scents to potential flavors. And then we're going to go into the 3 phases of tasting. The first phase will be when we put the bourbon in our mouth. You want to make sure that you cover your entire tongue. If you miss part of the tongue, you're going to miss part of the flavor. Different areas of the tongue taste different things, so if you miss part of the tongue, you're going to miss part of the flavor. So phase 1 will be when we put the bourbon in our mouth, cover the entire tongue, slosh it around, hold it as long as you like, and then swallow it. That's phase 1. Phase 2 begins immediately, and you don't have to do anything. Your body's 98.6 degrees. The bourbon's going to go in at about 70 degrees. Then when you swallow, you're going to have residual bourbon on your cheek, on your tongue, and that your body begins to heat that residual bourbon up. And as it heats it up, that bourbon will release flavors that weren't there originally. So that's phase 2. Those flavors are going to come as a burst of flavors on your tongue. It'll be called aftertaste, secondary taste, it's called finish, call it whatever you want to call it, it will be there. Then we're going to go into phase 3. Now phase 3 gets to be a little bit sketchy, so you're going to have to work with me on phase 3. Now in phase 3 we have to add oxygen to that residual bourbon. You're already adding the heat, now you have to add oxygen. You do that by doing what we call the Kentucky Chew, and that's just simply, now do it. Just do it like nobody's watching. So, unfortunately, it doesn't happen for everyone every time. But what's going to happen if it happens is you're going to get a burst of flavors and it's not going to be on your tongue. It's going to be at the base of the tongue on the sides, right in here. Now, if it happens for you, try it tomorrow, it may not happen. If it doesn't happen for you, try it tomorrow, it may happen. It's hit or miss, and it comes and it goes. And the only way to find out whether or not it's going to work for you today is by giving it a try today. So go ahead, put the bourbon in your mouth, slosh it around, cover the entire tongue, swallow whenever you're ready, and then just wait a moment, and boom, there should be a burst of flavors in your mouth. That's the aftertaste, secondary taste, or finish. Now add oxygen. Just chew it like nobody's watching, make some noise, get something going. Anybody getting anything right? Good, that's what we're talking about. That's it right there. That's it. So you try it tomorrow, it may not happen. You try it tomorrow, it may happen. It's hit or miss like that. All right. Kentucky is from now on, the other tasting that we do, you guys drink it any way you want at your leisure. I'm not giving you any more instructions on how to drink. Kentucky is the perfect place to make bourbon. It really is. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but two of the biggest reasons are our weather and our water. Now I'll tell you more about the weather later on and the effect that it has on the aging process. I'll tell you about the water right now. This entire state of Kentucky is situated over a series of limestone shelves. And this limestone serves as a filter for our water. So as the water flows to us over, under, around, and through the limestone is going to filter out some undesirable stuff. Stuff like iron, as an example. Left in the water, the iron would be metallic, would be bitter, and if the limestone didn't remove it, we'd have to remove it chemically, and then we have to deal with those chemicals. So the limestone does us a huge favor by serving as a filter. Additionally, we pick up minerals from the limestone. Minerals such as calcium and magnesium, just to mention a couple of many. Calcium, for example, is very important. It's important to us as consumers. High calcium water is healthy water. But it also calcium participates in the chemical reaction that takes place between the enzymes in malted barley and the starch in corn to make sugar. Calcium is important to that process. So the water, those minerals do a lot for us health-wise and process-wise. These minerals also drive the pH of the water up. High pH water is commonly referred to as hard water, and hard water is perfect for good fermentation. Now, if you take a look at the schematic here in the wall, you look at the very top up there, it says the James Beam Distillery. That's where we are right now. Then the bottom left-hand corner down here, it says the Booker No Distillery. That distillery is our second distillery, located 17 miles from here. We share the same watershed. So we don't have to be concerned about bourbon made at Booker No and bourbon made at Jim Beam tasting different because it's different water. It's the same water. And we share this water shed with the Hotham Arboretum and Research Forest. It's 16,000 acres. And there's nothing there but trees and a couple of lakes. 16,000 acres is approximately the size of Manhattan Island. And there are more trees in Bernheim than there are people in Manhattan. We're not going to have any housing developments or construction sites that might be detrimental to our water. So it is the perfect water, and it's sustainable for the foreseeable future. Now, in 1964, the Johnson administration passed a bill that made bourbon a unique American product. This bill basically said, reduced to its very finest points, all bourbons are whiskey, but not all whiskeys are bourbon. In order for a whiskey to be called bourbon, it has to meet 5 conditions established by these 5 panels right here. First of all, bourbon must be produced in the USA. Some people think bourbon has to be produced in Kentucky. It does not. But 95% of all the bourbon made in the USA is made in Kentucky. And of the 95% made in Kentucky, Jim Beam makes about 45% of that. So we're the largest player in this industry. Number two, bourbon must be aged in a new charred oak barrel. Now the law doesn't specify what kind of oak. Here at Jim Beam, we use only white oak. Number three, we have a recipe by which we mix the grains, but we don't call it a recipe, we call it a mash bill. The mash bill must contain at least 51% corn. It cannot contain less, but it can contain more. In fact, most bourbons are made with somewhere between 70 and 75% corn. Proof. Percent alcohol by volume doubled is proof. So if it's 45% alcohol, that's 90 proof. If it's 50% alcohol, that's 100 proof. Bourbon cannot come off the still at greater than 160 proof. Anything over 160 is basically vodka or gin, and you've distilled all the flavors of the grain out of the alcohol. Bourbon can't go into a barrel at greater than 125 proof, and bourbon can't go into a bottle at less than 80 proof. And then finally, fifth requirement, we can add nothing to our grain other than water. So no coloring, no flavors, no preservatives, no sweeteners, nothing, just water. So the process is this: we buy 15 semi-trailer truckloads of grain per day. 10 of those trucks are corn, and the other 5 are rye and malted barley. To give you an idea of scale, 10 truckloads of corn represents about 57 acres of corn. So we're purchasing and consuming 57 acres of corn here every day. Our sister plant, 17 miles from here, the Booker Noe plant, is 3 times larger than we are, so they're purchasing 3 times that much each day. Once the grains arrive, they're very carefully inspected. Once they pass the inspection, they go directly to a hammer mill. Now the hammer mill does nothing more than just breaks the grains open. We're not trying to reduce it down to flour consistency or cornmeal consistency. We're just breaking the grains open to expose the center. The center of the corn is where the starch is. The center of the rye is where flavors are, and the center of the malted barley are where enzymes are. So we break the grains open, we mix the grains together the proper ratio, we add water, and we cook it. Now the cooking process takes 2 to 2.5 hours, and it does nothing more than softens everything up so the enzymes can react with the starch to make sugar, and then the flavors from the rye mingles among everything else. At the end of this 2.5 hour period, we have this thick soup that we call mash. And then the mash is brought into this room and put into these tanks. Now if you'll look, you'll see the tanks go, they go up a floor above us, and you look through the glass, you can see they go down a floor below us. Each tank holds 45,000 gallons of mash. 45,000 gallons. The average home swimming pool holds 20,000 gallons of water, so there's 2.25 swimming pools full of mash in each one of these tanks. We have 15 of the tanks in this room. We have 22 on site, 15 of them right here. So, after we've added the mash, we then add yeast. Yeast is a living microorganism, and as a living organism, it has to eat in order to survive. So what it eats is sugar, and then the byproduct of that consumption is heat, carbon dioxide, and alcohol. And that is fermentation. Consumption of the sugar, converting it to alcohol, is fermentation. The process takes 3 to 5 days, typically around 4 days. At the end of the 4 days, we have what's called distiller's beer, and the distiller's beer contains about 8% alcohol. Now that doesn't sound like a lot, 8%, but there's enough alcohol in each one of these tanks then to fill 143 barrels of bourbon times 22 of these tanks. Now let me tell you a little bit more about the yeast. The yeast is very critical to the process. The master distiller, all distillers, they look for a yeast that does a few things. They want a yeast that adds flavor to the bourbon. So they're looking for a flavorful yeast. They're looking for a yeast that is easy to grow and propagate. We grow our own yeast here every day. We use 750 gallons of yeast in each one of these tanks. So 750 gallons times 22 of these tanks. We grow it here live every day. We purchase no yeast on the outside. We use no frozen yeast. We use no dried yeast. We grow our yeast here live every day. And then finally, we have to have a technique for protecting the yeast. If we're going to use the same yeast in every one of these tanks today, tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, in order to have continuity across that timeline, we're going to have to be able to protect that yeast. If we had a lightning strike, a tornado, or a fire here, if it were to kill our yeast, we'd be back to ground zero, looking for that yeast again, or looking for another yeast that's as good, and we may or may not be able to find it. In the early 1930s, Jim Beam discovered a yeast growing on his kitchen windowsill. He thought that was curious. He mixed up a pot of sugar, water, and corn, made a slurry out of it. He put part of it in the backyard and part of it in the kitchen. 3 or 4 days later, he checked it. Not much activity in the kitchen, but the backyard was covered with this yeast. So he scraped it off, he brought it in, and he made bourbon. And he liked it. So over the course of the next 2 years, through the process of elimination, he got the other yeast and said, this is the yeast we're going to use moving forward. He'd already determined that it tasted good. He knew that he could grow it, he could propagate it. He knew it was highly efficient. Now he had to have a technique for protecting it. Thus we have the 1939 catalog. This is very similar to the one that Jim Beam drove. And if you look in the front seat on the passenger side, you'll see a copper yeast pot. Jim Beam took a portion of his yeast home with him every day, and he required other people in the company to do the same thing. His theory was there would not be a single catastrophic event big enough to kill the yeast here, at his home in Barnestown, and at the homes of other employees. And it worked. Here we are 90 some odd years later. The yeast we use today is that exact same strand of yeast that he discovered in the early 1930s.
I do think Terry's doing a fantastic job on this tour. I'm learning a lot, and I'm sorry that it gets really loud out here.
Before we go down, I want to point out one thing. We feed that still. The distiller's beer gets pumped into that still at a rate of 200 gallons per minute. And we get 50 gallons per minute of low wine out of that still. So 200 gallons coming in, 50 gallons coming out. That means there's 150 gallons of excess mash and water per minute that gets pumped right over there to that station where the steam is coming out of that stack. That steam is the result of a drying process. We dry that mash out, and then we actually pay local farmers to come get it. They haul it off and use it as livestock feed and fertilizer. So come on down, take a look, and then I'll come up here and tell you all about it. So it goes into the barrel crystal clear, but it comes out that nice amber color, so 100% of the color of bourbon comes from the barrel. Master Distiller tells us about 70% of the flavor of bourbon comes from the barrel. Well, I can't prove that. There's no instrument that measures flavor, but I can prove that the color comes from the barrel, and we'll do that in a few minutes. Now, I'm going to spill some here intentionally, and I encourage you, if you want, to come up, get your hands wet, and then do two things. First, just smell it. Then, rub your hands together, generate some heat, get some oxygen mixed in there like we did in the first tasting. Smell it again. The smell changes dramatically just because of the heat and oxygen. At first, it smells like hand sanitizer, and then after you add the heat and oxygen, it smells like, to me, it smells like sourdough bread. Everybody's different. Come on up and give it a try if you want. It dries quickly, and I've got to clean his hands in the morning. They look for trees in this region of the country, not just Kentucky. I do actually buy from about 23 different states, all in the central part of the U.S. They look for trees that are 80 to 100 years old, and we get, on average, 2 barrels from the heartwood of each tree, just 2. So the trees go down, then they go to a log yard where we have the opportunity to inspect them. So what we're looking for is we're looking for bugs, we're looking for disease, we're looking for anything that might be detrimental to the quality of the barrel or detrimental to the taste of bourbon. Once we approve a log, it gets measured. We buy by the foot. Now, assuming everything's okay, Andy's going to give us his nice breed and everything's okay. Regeneration is critical, obviously, if you're only going to get 2 barrels from each tree. So when they cut trees down, they cut away competing species. They open up the canopy so natural sunlight comes in, and we have natural regeneration, each tree leaving behind dozens of seedlings. And we plant 2 trees for every tree cut. So there's more white oak growing today than ever before. Trees are cut to this length, then they're quartered, then they're cut into the individual stays, and the stays get stacked and stored out in the elements for 9 months. The weathering process opens up the porosity of the wood and kills off things in the wood like tannins that would not be flavorful in our wood. Then we taper the stays, we form a barrel, and we flame the inside of that barrel using an open flame, natural gas flame, for 55 seconds, and that gives us what's called a number 4 char. We have a 1, 2, 3, and 4. The 4 is the deepest, most severe char. Sometimes referred to as an alligator char because it tends to look a little bit like an alligator hide if you use your imagination. Then we put the bands on the barrel. We put the heads and tails in. We drill a buttonhole. Now we have a barrel ready to hold 53 gallons of bourbon. Moving on, I will tell you about the weather and the effect the weather has on the aging process. Well, you just saw that we char the inside of this barrel. And what that charring does, it opens up the porosity of the wood, but it also caramelizes the natural sugars that are in wood. All living plants have sugar. You burn a plant, you caramelize that sugar. You burn this wood, you caramelize that sugar. So we char the inside of the barrel, then we put 53 gallons of bourbon in there. And the very first thing that happens after you put 53 gallons of bourbon in there is it begins to migrate. It begins to migrate across the charred layer, picking up those flavors from the caramelized sugar into the wood, where it picks up additional flavors from the wood itself. And then later in the very first day, the temperature outside is going to change. If it gets warmer, that barrel is going to expand slightly, and also the bubble on the inside expands, the trapped air on the inside expands. That increases the pressure in the barrel, and that pushes more bourbon across the char layer into the wood. And then that evening and overnight, when it gets cooler, the barrel is going to actually contract slightly. And that contraction then squeezes bourbon out of the wood, back across the char layer, back into the barrel. So that's the aging process, as complex as that sounds, or as simple as that sounds. It's the movement of bourbon from the barrel across the char layer into the wood, and then from the wood across the char layer back into the barrel. So it moves back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, thousands and thousands of times over 2 years, 4 years, 6, 8, 10, 12, ever how long it's in the barrel. Now the driving force behind this movement is temperature. And here in Kentucky, we have 4 very distinct seasons: summer, fall, winter, and spring. Our seasons are approximately equally spread, so they're about the same length, give or take a week or so. So we're not like Texas, Florida, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Georgia, where you have an extended hot summer. And we're not like Michigan, Montana, Wisconsin, Minnesota, where you have an extended long winter. Here we have these 4 evenly spread seasons. We have temperature variation from season to season. We have temperature variation around here from month to month, week to week, day to day, hour to hour. 3 days ago, I woke up, it was 26 degrees. Now it's right up against 60 something, and this time next week it'll probably be 80 something. So that's why Kentucky's the perfect place to age bourbon.
So here is the lobby when you first walk in. This is where you book your tours. They got a schedule up here. It tells you when they're all taken off and how much they cost. It's a really neat building. The upstairs is the tasting portion, and they have a gift shop back here in the back. We'll go check that out next. They have a pretty extensive gift shop in the very back corner. where it says tours meet here. That's where you met for our tour, where they took us around. But you can get your bottles and merchandise right here. There is a circular elevator right here, which takes you up to the second floor for the tasting area. And they have a little waiting area out here. And there's restrooms and stuff that you can visit before your tour begins. All right, well, I think that's gonna wrap this up here at Jim Beam. I hope you got something out of this. I know I did. I enjoyed bourbon. I thought it was really neat. The tour was very informative. They did say that in the summertime, this place is pretty busy. They can get about 25, I think he said, on the bus for the tour. And he said typically they book all the tours up. In the off season, we only had, I basically had the tour to myself. It was me and another couple. But that was kind of nice in itself, just to get a little one-on-one with the tour guide, and super knowledgeable. I can't put everything in the tour. You're just gonna have to come out and check it out for yourself and get the parts that I left out. But there was so much information, and Jim Beam is a great product, been around for many, many generations. And I don't know who hasn't had Jim Beam, but if you haven't, try it. It's really good if you like bourbon. Just remember to please like, comment, subscribe, ring that notification bell, and just remember, if you can dream it, you can do it. See you guys.